Good morning, everyone. Good to be here. So yes, we're going to be talking about technology. What a boring topic for this early in the morning, but that's what we do for a living. I'm going to introduce the panel. First, I have Mr. Felix Villa. He's the cybersecurity advisor with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency of the Homeland Security Department. Then Mr. Van Washington, he's the CEO and owner of IDA Technology. And Mr. Carlos Martinez, Director of External and Legislative Affairs with AT&T. So let's get into the topic of tactics. That's a mouthful. Okay, first of all, and technology is so broad that we need to put some context to it. So I'm going to ask a question with that idea in mind, and it's simple. From their perspective, I'd like to hear what the panelists have to say about the trends that will be potentially be affecting small business in the next 12 to 24 months.
Keeping in mind the threats that can affect small businesses here in the next few months, up to a year or two. A lot of it is a lot of what we've been seeing from the agency side for the last couple of years. And those two main threats or trends is business email compromise and also ransomware. With those two type of threats and trends, basically, small businesses oftentimes think because they have a smaller attack surface, or maybe they don't have that big target on their back like larger organizations have, that they might not be targeted by malicious actors. However, the cases that we're seeing don't really fall in line with that. Malicious actors do not discriminate against organization sizes or really what they do as far as their businesses go. What they're looking for is really easy targets. And so they're looking through the internet, they're scanning all these devices, seeing what's vulnerable, what's not vulnerable. And those devices that are vulnerable, they're easy targets for them. And so they're infiltrating these networks through these avenues. And so this will continue to go on for the foreseeable future. And going back to what I mentioned earlier, specifically with business email compromise and ransomware, really, once attackers get a foothold of these networks, they're using accounts that are already part of this infrastructure, and they can make their crimes or malicious acts using these compromised accounts. And so they call it a term calling living off the land, which is basically the activity that they're doing looks similar to what your day-to-day operators are doing at work. And so it's hard to detect really whether they're trying to get to critical systems or maybe trying to get a critical data and further either deploy ransomware or finding ways to compromise maybe third parties that they might work with, have those trusted relationships with, to try to maybe go even further and conduct, for example, social engineering attacks or things of that sort. But yeah, definitely those trends I see continuing. Business email compromise attacks and ransomware attacks.
Thank you, Felix. Carlos?
And I think from our perspective and in terms of, is this working? In terms of other trends, obviously artificial intelligence is probably one of the biggest trends that we're seeing across the board. Big, small, medium-sized industry is being impacted by AI. I think the opportunity for small businesses exists in that AI has the ability, the capacity to synthesize a lot of data for small businesses when they may not have we were talking about this, the manpower to do it. So really scaling that capacity without a lot of workforce is really a space where for small businesses, AI can take them to the next level. Beyond that, obviously cybersecurity, ransomware, that's something across the board that's impacting all businesses. So as Mr. Villa mentioned, we all have to be vigilant. We all have to keep track of our data, what we have, and what we're reviewing, accepting, opening, and giving folks access to.
Van?
Antonio, thank you. We'll have more discussion on AI because there's a lot to be said about that. But let me take a different approach. And don't raise your hands, but how many of you here are over 40? Don't raise your hands. So here's the thought. In 2025, if I bring in an entry-level person, they were born in the year 2000. Just think about that. the year 2000, which means the way that they communicate is different than the way I communicated. The way they learned is different than the way that I learned. And the tools that they use to learn and communicate are totally different. And if I don't change my business model to be able to incorporate that demographic, then we won't be sustainable 20 years from there. So that's the important thing that I see is how do I now model our business with a new workforce? And the new workforce, guess what? They're going to come in the door with this thing called AI and its limitless capability. So as a small business owner, I'm concerned about how do I manage that and adapt my management model to be able to support a system that allows them to be as successful as they can be.
Vaughn, thank you very much. If I'd known, I would have never asked that question. I think I'm retiring. So let's take the topic of cybersecurity first. We'll hear about it on a daily basis. But from the standpoint of small businesses, what practices can small businesses put in place to protect themselves?
Yeah, so from the agency point of view, when it comes to small businesses, that's something that we really focus on, and having our stakeholders that we work with understand that there's things they can do, and some of them can take a small amount of time, so like let's a couple of weeks or months to implement and improve their cybersecurity posture, while others are going to take longer, let's say years, to even possibly reach a certain maturity level. So here at CISA, we work with critical infrastructure owners. So we focus on working with sectors such as healthcare, K through 12 education, election infrastructure at the moment. And so because, again, most of the time our core base that we work with are the large organizations, when we approach small businesses, they think that some of those services don't scale down to them. But that's actually not true. A lot of the best practices we focus on and we recommend for larger businesses to adapt, they can be easily adaptable by smaller organizations, small businesses in this case. And so, for example, just to start off, if you work with CISA, we offer assessments, we offer workshops, tabletop exercises, et cetera, to make organizations be more resilient to a cyber incident. However, there's some things that small businesses can do on their own without CISA, without a third party, without an internal cybersecurity team. Small business owners can take some practices, some initiative on their own, and start improving their cybersecurity posture. And so I always recommend 4 things to start off with. One of them is having good asset inventory, knowing what IT devices are part of your business. That includes obviously mobile endpoints, also cell phones, laptops, servers that have critical data. Who are the users that are accessing these systems? Having a good accountability of that, and then along with that, implementing complex or strong passwords, minimum of 16 characters. Maybe have some upper, lowercase in there as well, special characters, add some numbers. Just make those passwords more complex than unfortunately what we still see, which is stuff like password 123, I love the Cowboys 99, whatever it is that you're into. Next thing I recommend is implement multi-factor authentication, at least some of those systems that have critical data, right? Or maybe some of those accounts that belong to the owner of the business, or those that have access to important, maybe trade secrets for the organization, implement MFA. And then finally, vulnerability management. All those systems that you identify, make sure that, first of all, they're not end of life. And so obviously if a system is end of life, that means that the manufacturer doesn't support it anymore. So there's no updates, no security patches, things like that you can do to protect that system. And again, that's going to be an easy prey for these malicious actors that are looking to infiltrate your network. And then the other thing, those systems that are not end of life but are still important to your organization, find ways to keep up with patches or system updates. That way, again, you make it a little bit more hardened and not as easy of a point for malicious actors to infiltrate. But yeah, those 4 things, again, if you can do that on your own as small businesses. Again, asset inventory, password complexity, implementation, multi-factor authentication, and then vulnerability management. Again, you should be able to do that on your own, maybe a YouTube video at the most if you need a little bit of extra help. But yeah, if you get started with that, you should be in a better place.
I got to remember that I need to get microphone closer to my mouth. Every time I'm in the podium, I get the same message. So I guess I'm not going to learn anymore. Okay, so one thing I wanted to underline that has worked for us with our clients, and that's awareness training. You need to make sure that everyone in your organization understands the potential risk and how they can avoid it. So I didn't want to leave that one topic because it has been very successful to us, just to make sure that you let people know how phishing works, how people can get into your computer, how not patching your system or updating your system makes it pretty weak. So keep that in mind. Let me see. I've heard the word AI quite a bit. I'm sure that all of us have, and like you, I don't have an idea what that is. But what can small businesses do? I'm not talking about small businesses to adapt and integrate AI to their operations today, other than paying money.
Yeah, AI is, some of the guidance we really try to get through to small businesses is them understanding what the AI is actually doing, what the tool is, where it lives, who's actually developing it. Because all the data you're feeding into AI is going to be data that's going to be exposed to other parties and actors. And so if you can just do some research, get very familiar with that tool you're using, from a cybersecurity point of view is important. So for example, let's say you're using it in your operations and you have customer data. What's that customer data you're feeding it? Is it PII, personal identifier information, your customers' names, phone numbers, social security numbers, et cetera? Who can, have access to that as well? And so even furthermore, once you do your research on those AI tools you're using and what data you're going to be feeding it, who else in your organization is aware of what those tools do? So like you mentioned, Antonio, having that security awareness training so that everybody's aware, again, of how to use these tools responsibly. At the agency, we actually have to take about 10 hours of AI training before we can start using any tools. A lot of the stakeholders of various sizes are putting policies in place before they actually start putting some of these tools out there into the organization. And so, again, small businesses, I think, are also those are some practices they should also consider taking into place, being aware of the tool, having policy in place, et cetera.
We were told to switch microphones. So I think it goes back to again, the awareness piece that you just mentioned. We also have to take training before we start using any AI tools, any chat GPT. And so that's one thing that I think small businesses need to be very cognizant of is if you upload your either personal identifiable information or any of your personal business secrets into a chat GPT, you're opening that up into the public, right? That you need to be very careful about what you're feeding artificial intelligence, especially if it's pertains to business sensitive secrets. So at AT&T, we have our own chat GPT tool that we use internally because there are certain things that we're going to want AI to help us generate that we don't necessarily want to open up into a public space. So I would say just be very cautious in the sense of if you're using the tools, what is accessible to the public? What can you keep control of? It goes back to that ability to synthesize a lot of data. If small businesses, let's take a farmer here in the Upper Valley of El Paso. If they're using artificial intelligence to understand what rain trends look like and how they need to adapt to their irrigation systems, or what is the latest and greatest technology that's going to help them produce the greatest crop or the greatest yield, that's the kind of tangible use that you don't need a lot of complexity to understand AI to think about it and really draw from a lot of places of data and make it very specific to that situation.
One,
And what was the question, sir? I'm just joking.
don't mess with me.
So when I think about AI and I think about companies, so AI, so the ability to use computers, software that produces cognitive human reasoning, learning, and output. And so when I think about that, I think about first, how do you integrate that into your company? Because first you got, it's like anything else, what's the process? So we call it a bottoms-up review. How do you do a review of how you're currently doing things? And then what are those things that you want to now assign to AI? And then why do I want to assign certain tasks to AI? Let me give you an example. If the best and brightest of your team are spending hours doing tasks that don't provide the kind of productivity that those hours provide, maybe you allow them to use, with your training, say some tools that will answer emails or do some constructive paragraphs for general tasks. But where am I going with that? You have to figure out what that is by doing a understanding of your current processes. But the end goal is, how do I buy back time from my best and brightest so they can solve our most difficult problems? So if I can free up 3 or 4 hours of my team's time in critical positions, and now we can take that time and solve our most critical problems and then do our real strategy training, what would that do to your bottom line? So at the end of the day, it's all about, how can AI help me in my bottom line? How can it help my team be more efficient? But how can I first understand the development of the culture? Because it won't happen unless you institute that culture. And so that's why you got to review your processes, understand how you want to enter AI into what you already do, and then build that culture on how to use the tools. Once that culture is there, they'll adopt it, and you'll start seeing the efficiencies.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you. Actually, we are beginning to, we're being asked for some of our clients to develop a list of best practices for the use of AI. They're also concerned about the legal liability of using information that they were not supposed to use. Somebody just downloaded through an AI application. So it is something that we're beginning to see. Have you heard anything about that? Have you have any experience with it?
From that standpoint, in terms of, first of all, the security aspect of it, most definitely we're in the DoD space, so everyone's concerned about leakage and data. Happens all the time, and they're constantly under attack. Secondly, definitely there's a concern with how employees understand the filters, not just rely on the tools, but it's always going to be the human mind and its cognitive understanding. Is this right? Is this, does this align with what I'm currently doing? And then make the call to either pull back or shut it down or notify someone.
Thank you. All right, so we talked about AI, we talked about cybersecurity, and so I'm gonna jump to a question that has to do more with the practicality of doing something about it. So what do you think that small businesses need to be doing in order to select the right application and then to implement it, keeping in mind time, costs, resources? Ron is not in the document.
Oh.
So, is this working? No, it's still not working.
Is it working? Yeah, yeah.
So when it comes to organizations adopting new applications and vetting them and seeing, if it's going to work for them and if it can be implemented within, I guess, reasonable amount of time, I'd say leaning back on having good project management practices. So one, getting a good scoping of what personnel you have, what skills you have, obviously understanding of what your need is. And so will that application or tool fill in that specific a problem or maybe business process you're trying to improve or solve? Again, being with CISA, I have to take this conversation over to the cybersecurity side a little bit. And so outside of the business part of it, fitting your basic project management items that you should be taking care of and implementing these tools, it's important for you to understand who that third party is you're working with. So basically, what is their country of origin? Where is their headquarters located in that? Because in a way, that risk that they have is something you're going to inherit. Obviously, the state of the world right now is a little bit rocky in certain parts. And so if there's some sort of blockage on certain systems or for example, TikTok, right, that a lot of users are using or leaning on, and they just block it, what are you going to do? Is that actually bringing some value, and are you going to lose that? What's going to be your backup plan? Will that maybe hit your marketing department? So those are things you should consider, understanding where these tools are coming from. If they were to just be inaccessible to you, how will you move forward? What is going to be that backup plan? If, again, that data that they're storing, if they're handing it off to other organizations or other countries, and you take on that risk, how are you going to work with that? So for example, let's say, let me go back to personal identifier information. That's the most basic type of information that most small businesses probably use, apart from maybe like credit card, PCI type of data. If there's a spillage there, now you got a couple of problems. First of all, you're probably going to lose some reputation. Your customers are going to be upset that their data is out there owned by somebody who shouldn't probably have it. Two, you're probably going to have some sort of operation disruption. You're probably going to have to put payments or some sort of process on hold to try to control the leakage of that data. And then third, if there's data, let's say HIPAA or PCI, that's leaked, and that's usually under compliance or regulatory controls, now you have to worry about regulators coming after you and giving you penalties, or maybe there's going to be fees that you have to worry about. So again, it starts off with a basic premise where you have data that you're using a tool that you didn't vet right, and now it's become into a little bit of a headache, or I'd say probably a pretty large headache, because now you have 3 different groups that you've affected just by not vetting that tool right in your business process.
Thank you.
I think like Vaughn hit it clearly in the previous answers. You need to understand as a small business what your needs are and where that ROI is going to come, and how you're alleviating the workload for what specific part of your business. I mean, we use artificial intelligence in a myriad of ways, from that very simple Ask AT&T, ChatGPT type function where I can go and draft an email or some talking points, to automating more complex systems and services like billing and whatnot. So you need to just understand for your business what are your needs. And then from there, do your due diligence, do the research, and what applications do you actually need. You probably aren't going to need everything AI has the capacity to do. You just need to identify where the ROI is specifically for your business.
And I'll make it short. Are you ready, willing, and able as a organization to adopt AI? What are your current challenges, and how can AI assist those? What are your current goals? How can AI assist those? And then do you have the time, energy, and resources to do it? Once you make that commitment of time, energy, and resources, and then you understand what those challenges are, how you want to address them, then you can move forward. Most often when we talk to folks, they want to do AI, but they don't know what the time cost, the energy and manpower cost, and what the physical cost might be. And so once you go through and kind of do that bottoms-up review in your company, then you'll have a clarity on here's how I want to move forward, and then these are the appropriate tools, and then you get the training.
Thank you very much. The 3 of you were talking about regulatory, what the business needs. It's kind of interesting when we talk to businesses and we ask them what is one of the most important things in your business. First thing, technology. Without it, we can't live it. Then we start talking about how much it costs to maintain technology. And everybody said, oh, we don't have money, right? Today, businesses, especially work for the federal government, state government, you're being asked to satisfy cybersecurity regulation. You either need to meet the standards of the NIST standard, or the components of the NIST standard, or certified to certain levels of competency when it comes to cybersecurity. How can business understand that without that they're not going to be successful in the marketplace? 1, 2, how can they finance their way through? Because it is not inexpensive. Like one of you gentlemen was saying, they need to do an assessment of the risk. They need to look at those tools that they need to implement, and then ultimately manage all of that to make sure that you can report on your progress.
So yes, definitely, like you said, that's not something that's low cost. It gets pricey, it gets expensive. And so one of the things that's important for small businesses to know and have their leadership know is that, first of all, that cost is going to be there, right? And so how do you do that, though? If you're the owner, you're probably well aware of that, and you're funding that to what that level is of an acceptable level to run it at. However, if you're a little bit a larger size on the small business end and you're trying to get maybe the owner or the executives to get that understanding that there needs to be more funding to certain frameworks you have to fit, like you mentioned, the NIST cybersecurity framework, that can be a little bit difficult to communicate. And so what I recommend stakeholders I work with is that they have a plan or a process to communicate that. Adopting a framework is a good way to do that. One of the frameworks that I recommend, and it's scalable, large organizations, small businesses of less than 20 employees, agriculture, a lot of these family businesses around the Southern New Mexico area that have been around for decades have adopted actually some of these frameworks. Anyways, one of those is a NIST cybersecurity framework. And what that does is it gets your cybersecurity program and it really identifies 5 areas you can work on. So first one is governance. Then you have identification, then detection, and responsive recovery to a cyber incident. And so for this particular part where you're worried about funding, you focus on the governance part. You want everybody in the organization to know how cybersecurity supports the strategic goals of the organization. And so, by pretty much explaining your cybersecurity program, or in this case, regulatory items that would fall under a cybersecurity program and the importance of them, it's usually a pretty easy way to communicate that without having to get into all the details of like, oh, we have to have complex passwords, and we have to have critical systems, and we have to have these controls, and we have to have all these other architectures, reviews, and all this stuff. You just say like, hey, we need to meet the standard. This is going to be the cost. This is why we're doing it. Here's a framework showing that. Do you have any questions? And usually that leads to some pretty valuable and engaging conversations so we understand why that funding is needed and then to finally get it. But as I mentioned a little bit as an example, I've been working closely with the agriculture sector in Southern New Mexico. A lot of them are owned by the same person over decades. They have those trusted relationships. But cybersecurity is something new to them. And so at first, they were a little bit resistant to understanding why they should consider cybersecurity and practices, implementing its controls, et cetera. But once we, again, backed it up with data under the framework showing who's getting ransomware, how that affects food supplies, things like that, the community, they got a pretty good understanding of why those investments are needed in cybersecurity for those specific controls.
In terms of the regulatory component of this, I think we're going to see a lot of action on that, both at the state and the federal level. I think that's, as we've seen with social media, AI being that it's nascent, but also getting to the point where it's more pronounced in society, we're going to see that regulation. I think the balance is just going to have to be to ensure that businesses still have the flexibility to do what they need to do while using artificial intelligence. In terms of cost, it's costly, and so the end user needs to do the research and ensure that they're seeking out the services that they need specifically, not so that they're not going out and getting a bunch of stuff that they're maybe never going to use.
Thank you. Fine.
Yeah, for our industry, that day is here. So we're in the DoD arena, or if you're in the fellow industry space. They just recently passed the legislation and put into the federal acquisition legislation, put in the cybersecurity model requirements. So cybersecurity, a maturity model, level 1, level 2, you can self-certify. Level 3, you have to have an independent external evaluation. And it is fairly costly, but you will not be able to compete or submit a bid if you don't have that. So that day is here, and so as a company, even if you team with someone on a large contract, you're responsible for your own independent certification. So the day is here, and we have to get on board, and yes, it is costly.
Thank you. Thank you. We're seeing with our client base, the more and more are being asked to buy cybersecurity liability insurance. Help them fill up their applications and look at the controls that they have in place, like multi-factor authentication, like a password policy and all that. And the prices continue to going up. is there areas that you all know about that would make the cost of that insurance less expensive? Just a control, maybe technology control that they can put in place to reduce that cost?
With the stakeholders I'm working with, specifically small businesses that are either CI or supporting CI, main thing to try to keep those costs low or lower when it comes to cybersecurity insurance is one, working with providers that are going to do modeling for you or right size that insurance for you. That's something that I think is sometimes overlooked or ignored. They just kind of go with the basic tier pricing. But if you work with these insurance companies and you give them a good idea of what your infrastructure looks like, what you're trying to protect, they help you right size and sometimes lower costs for your insurance. Also, another thing noticing, and this is not a sell on CISA or anything like that, is if you have certain programs that you're participating in with CISA, that actually helps lower your insurance costs as well. Apart from that, the industry seems to be moving towards a more analytical or data-driven approach when it comes to cybersecurity insurance. Whereas right now, like you said, Antonio, they have these questions that they ask you. It's kind of like an audit, like, do you have MFA implemented? Do you have all your endpoints managed, and do you have them accounted for? And then based on how you answer those questions, if you have yes and a bunch of stuff, basically they assume you have a better cybersecurity posture than somebody who would have those. However, moving forward, they're looking at, and some organizations are already doing this, some cyber insurance companies, inputting systems or data collectors within your network that are actually going to verify that you actually have these controls in place and that they're implemented properly. And if they are, then your insurance costs will lower. And if they're not, then you're going to be higher risk, right? And so then your insurance costs will also go up. So keep an eye out for that. If you're speaking to an insurance provider, and they go this data analytics approach, that's what they're doing. So similar to telematics in automobiles now, when you're driving them, and if you go speeding and things like that, right, your insurance is going to change. It's going that route. But overall, I kind of have to go back to that. If you want to keep your cyber insurance premiums lower, then you want to lean on good practices, cybersecurity practices, sound practices, have things like incident response plans. That way, not only are you more resilient to a cyber incident, but also, the insurance companies will know that you'd be a good partner to work with.
Just quickly, Antonio, the three things from us is documentation of our program, so quality documentation, as much training and certification of training. A lot of the training is free, so just show up with your documentation, your plan, your training, and any certificates of training that you have.
Thank you. Thank you. The importance of cybersecurity liability is obvious whenever you have an incident and you have to pay for notifying people, understanding where the problem came from. You need to bring some forensic talent to determine how much data you lost, and that can rack up a lot of costs. So if you don't have cybersecurity liability, but you have personal identifiable information in your servers, you definitely need to consider doing something about that. Okay. Let me see. We talked about in the area of empowering your workforce. What sort of thing can small businesses do, other than the training stuff, to get their staffs to a competency level when it comes to cybersecurity, AI, or technology in general?
For individuals, I think, and it's already been mentioned a few times, obviously having a cybersecurity awareness training program is important. That way employees can easier identify phishing emails and feel empowered to know what to do, who to report it to, what action to take. Also, another thing that sometimes gets overlooked is having a role-specific cybersecurity training. So, if you have a field worker who maybe doesn't touch a computer much, maybe they just need some sort of basic training. Whereas if let's say you have somebody in the HR department, or maybe, you're the owner of your small business, you probably should be aware of more than just the basic one-on-one cybersecurity things you should look out for. So some of those can be going back to business email compromise. If you have employees that get social engineering, become victims to that by a third party, trusted third party that requests for them to change their, let's say, banking information. Are they going to do that, or are they going to follow a process that's going to have controls in place so that they don't easily start sending payments to a malicious actor? And so, yeah, I would say those two things. Just keep it in mind, not only basic cybersecurity awareness training, but also having that role specific, depending on who handles what data, for them to be a little bit more trained in that area and to watch out for specific malicious actions on them or their systems.
Yeah, spot on. It's just training. Because we get test emails all the time. We learn to identify what we need to be aware of because, and it's not just on the business side of the house, it's also on the personal side of the house. Like, I know that because I am an AT&T employee and I know that I am being targeted not only on my business phone, but on my personal accounts because it's easy to identify that I mean, obviously I have a LinkedIn. Obviously, you know, those cyber criminals and predators are gonna look for the folks that they can target. So making sure that your employees are aware that it's not just gonna happen on the business side, it's also gonna happen on the personal side.
Thank you.
Just real quickly, awareness. And so if we see occurrences, say phishing occurrences, we kind of capture those and then let employees know every 2 weeks, hey, oh, by the way, this occurred. And so that they have an awareness and we keep it in front of them.
Thank you, Juan. Following up on that, one of the things that with our clients that we do is try to establish some processes that are considered more critical than others. For instance, whenever an employee leaves your organization, you need to have someone internally or an external partner to make sure that that person gets blocked from access once they leave. You'd be surprised how many businesses have emails and access accounts that are live years after a person left the company. That is a window into problems, big window. So anything that you do when it comes to the management of employees, management of resources is important that you keep track very closely. And like Juan indicated, make sure that you document. Two things that not necessarily come directly from AI or cybersecurity, but that impact businesses is remote work. Okay. We had to go home because of the pandemic, and now we don't want to come back. And we're having to manage users through larger geographies. What sort of recommendation can you give businesses to protect themselves from computer systems being away?
Yeah, I can definitely relate with not going back in the office, but I think some of the things that infrastructure owners can do to help mitigate the risk of employees working from home is one of them is use VPN. I mean, if you're going to have your employee base access critical systems, critical information, you want to make sure they do it through a secure connection. You know, they might be connecting from Starbucks or somewhere else, right? And so having VPN really helps if they do decide to make the bad decision and access your network from a public network. Also, another thing is you can set geolocation controls. So that way, if you know and you identify where your employees are going to be at working for most of the time, you can block out countries or parts of the world that they shouldn't be logging in from. Additional to that, going back to the training, making them aware of having best practices when they're working outside the office. Again, if they have access to critical data or systems, they probably shouldn't be showing their screen if they're working from a cafe or something like that. They want to have some sort of way to block that from anybody shoulder surfing and seeing, you know, what they're doing. But apart from that, I think the main thing is understanding that I think work from home is still going to remain in place. And so that's something that's just going to have to be addressed as new threats come up concerning working from home, and just keeping pace with it and putting controls as needed to keep that still not being, or at least mitigating that type of threat.
Training, of course, number one. And in terms of, and this may be good or bad, depending on the small business or depending on the business and whether or not you want your employees back in the office. But, if your employee has a high-speed connection and they are able to work quickly, they have a solid, reliable plug for AT&T fiber, scalable, a connection where, it might be better than they have at the office, well, that's maybe going to encourage them to work from home, but that could be a good thing or bad thing. But also making sure, as I said at the top of this, that connection is secure. We at AT&T pride ourselves in making sure that our connections are safe and reliable, so that our customers can work from home, so that they can do what they need to do from home in a safe manner. And as it pertains to business, right, making sure that connection is solid in the workspace, and also at home.
Just quickly, most of our employees are using their own independent networks, but we do provide company laptops or systems and have a third party that manages the software and then scans it on a regular basis, and so they know that.
So as the group business grows, they need to partner up with different technology companies and maybe the internet service provider, even the printer company, maybe the people that sell them the network equipment, all that. What kind of what things businesses need to be looking at whenever they're selecting technology business partners?
I spoke on this a little bit earlier, and I can go a little bit more into it. Under the understanding that third parties you work with, the risks that they have, you're going to inherit more than likely some of that. And so that's something we focus on at CISA pretty closely. We actually have just one assessment that looks at those third-party dependencies you have, the external dependencies management assessment. And what we do under the lens of that assessment is that we want organizations to, first of all, identify that risk that they might be inheriting, and then also how do they identify and what controls do they have in place or checklists, et cetera, to understand who they're going to work with. Once they vet them that way, then how do they actually form those relationships through contract language? For example, if that third party you work with, they have some sort of compromise or incident, are they going to let you know about it? Is it in the contract, whether it affects you or not? And even if it does affect you, will they inform you of it? If they have a vulnerability in their infrastructure and they decide to continue to live with it and not do anything about that, are they obligated to tell you? Or are they just going to continue to run with that vulnerability because the cost might be too high at the moment for them to fix it, and you're unaware of that? And so, when you form those relationships with third parties, that's some of the things that we recommend businesses look at. What's in the contract, right? After that, how do you review that relationship moving forward? Are you going to do that on an annual basis or as needed? Maybe there's maybe the quality or the service you're getting from them lowers and you need to change, maybe even terminate the relationship. But anyways, how often are you going to review that? What's your quality or standard of keeping that partner in place? And then finally, if you do decide to terminate your relationship with that third party, what's the reasoning for that? Is it easy to get out of that relationship? Is it difficult? So yeah, now it's starting to sound more like a romantic relationship, but what I'm getting at is it's hard, right? Once you start working with somebody and you decide that it's not working for you, how are you going to protect yourself to get out of that business relationship with them? And then moving forward, how do you leave yourself open to keep improving your business and maybe adopting new vendors? What is that criteria going to look like? What are they going to offer in comparison to the current third party you're working with? And so, yeah, definitely looking at it as a whole life cycle, right? Relationship formation, termination, and constant review. It is something we recommend just having that process in place.
Yeah, doing due diligence in terms of research, right? Obviously, you want to make sure that you're working with folks who have solid reputations in this space. And beyond, again, plug, is just the capacity and the speed for what you need and what the business needs. And if that's scalable and making sure that that's evaluated properly.
I have nothing to add.
Thank you.
They covered it.
Thank you, Juan. In our opinion, the last line of defense, whenever you're attacked, successfully attacked, is your data backup. In our opinion, there's nothing more important to have than and implement a very solid backup plan that covers your most critical information, the data that you need to operate the next day, and two, that there's an air gap between your live data and your backup data. Because if your live data gets corrupted and your backup is in the same server, guess what? It's going to be corrupted. So you want to have an air gap, what we call an air gap. That's in the. So keep that in mind. We insist every time that we engage with a client to back up, and we take painful steps to make sure that data is backed up and tested. So in my opinion, that's the very last line of defense. Okay, I don't know how we're doing on time. Yeah? Okay, yeah. I think that we've beat up this subject quite a bit. Anything, final thoughts that you may want to share with the audience?
Sure. My final thought is really regards to how cybersecurity empowers small businesses. I think a lot of times cybersecurity is seen as a cost to the business and not adding much value. But the important part of cybersecurity and having a strong posture or a strong program with it is that it helps to identify that business risk and when it's technology focused. And so if you're more prepared, more resilient for a cyber incident, then you'll be better off in addressing that and not have to put too much time into having to worry about that. So that would give you more time to focus on your customer delivery, maybe product improvement, et cetera. I think that's the stuff small businesses really want to focus on and spend their time on. Not so much what's compliance or regulatory, those guys are going to want from me or my customers' data are going to get stolen. If you just set sound practices in place, have that strong cybersecurity posture, it frees you up as a small business to focus, I think, on the things that you got into your business for, which is provide that good customer service, solving a problem for those that are your clients.
Prevention and training is key. That's really what it boils down to, is identify what you need to protect, what you need to, who needs what training, and make sure that the appropriate folks are doing what they need to do.
I'm going to take a little different spin. Some days when I go to work, I say it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. And everybody that's in small business or in any business understands that. We understand the agricultural age, industrial age, go all the way through distribution age. We went through the communications changes. AI just really changes the game. 2008, Apple did this thing saying, hey, guess what? We have this platform, and if you build apps, we'll host them on our platform and pay you. And that changed the game. Artificial intelligence is changing the game. And when I say that, it's changing the games in ways that we still don't yet understand. But it is revolutionary. And so more than any other time, you could do business then with Apple, not owning a platform, not having to pay for the service. Put your app. Now with artificial intelligence, the tools are there. You don't have to build the tools. They're there. So what's the creativity? What's the space? What's the imagination that's going to take place on how we use these to take our businesses to the next 10 years, the next 20 years? I'm excited about it, and I want a crew of folks that are younger than me, smarter than me, and know how to use these tools, and then we sit around the table and figure out how they can go and be great.
Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'd like to open it up for questions. Anyone has a burning question? Please raise your hand. There's a mic going around.
I just got a new laptop that has Copilot on it. Is it safe to use? I'm just putting in, I haven't really put in much yet, but on your topic.
It is safe to use if you're self-aware of what data you're putting in there. Again, having that understanding that once you feed it to Copilot, it's more than likely going to be shared with other users of that application as well. And so as long as you just keep that in mind, it should be safe for you to use.
In the event of a data breach, what immediate steps should a small business take to mitigate damage and recover?
That's I like that question a lot because it really depends on the organization. So one thing I actually like to ask stakeholders I work with when I work on exercises with them or whatever, I ask them, if you have an incident, who do you call first? Do you call the FBI? Do you call CISA? Do you call your legal team, or do you call your cyber insurance? I guess just because I'm there in person asking the question, they always say CISA. But that's, I would say, probably not the right answer for most organizations. I always recommend if you have an incident and you reach the point where it's exceeded the level of skill of your internal team to respond and you need to reach out to somebody, your legal team is going to be that first person you reach out to. Reach out to them, tell them what data you think might be compromised, what's going on. From there, if you have cyber insurance, have the conversation with them into what's going on with the incident. Cyber insurance companies do not want to pay the ransom if it's a ransomware incident, or they don't want to pay hefty expenses on recovering from the incident. So they're going to try to do everything they can to mitigate the incident, whether they send an incident response team to your location and they try to help recover, or any other practices they think make sense for them to, again, stop the bleeding in a way, they're going to do that. Finally, after that, then at that point is where I recommend you probably call, if you want to call the federal side, you call the FBI and CISA. Honestly, it doesn't matter who you call first. We're both going to be communicating more than likely and trying to help you out. Having said that, we have two different responsibilities, though. FBI is going to focus on the law enforcement side. So they're going to want to find out who the bad guy is, arrest that person, bring him to justice. If you call CISA, we're going to be focused on trying to keep your critical service up and running. And so, yeah, that's where our priorities are, but that we do have shared interests. And so, yeah, I hope I helped answer your question. Yep.
Anything else? We would recommend, first thing that you do is to open up your incident response plan that you already have in place. This you really need to think about, who are you going to call first? Hopefully your technology person. And then from there, you're going to have a list of steps to take to contain the problem. And they can be easily identifiable early on. So that would be, in our opinion, the very first thing. Yes, in the same document, you need to list the name of your attorney or insurance company. A lot of insurance policies, cybersecurity policies, come with legal support, and so maybe they're going to provide you that knowledge. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, for Vaughn. I'm a business owner, but I do road construction, so my employees are out in the field and we keep an eye on them. How do you keep an eye on your people that are home working, or what measures do you use? Because since COVID hit, I mean, I got to believe that the workforce is not the same. So how do you keep an eye on that?
The workforce isn't the same, and 80% of our people are working from home, and we've got several federal agencies that haven't been back in the office in 3 years. And so really it's KPIs, key performance indicators, that they have to submit on a regular basis. It's having communication, so make sure that you're online with them visually at least once a week so that they know they've got a team meeting. And then reporting, make them report out. And then constantly reinforcing the security processes and measures. No matter where your employees are, they got to find a way to feel connected to you. And so you have to figure out, how do I connect to them both emotionally, intellectually, and on work?
Thank you.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Over here.
It was a very interesting topic. So now that we know that we don't know, where does the state think they can tie this information in and create a portal where companies can start to take those baby steps understanding AI, who is not legitimate, because now this is kind of like a frontier. So who really knows what they're doing with your systems? And with GSA and the government going to their protocol, what is the state? What model are they going to have to tie everything together and give businesses and people access to this information that we just shared today?
So from the CISA side, one of the things we pay attention to is gaps in incident response between local entities through cities, counties, states, and then the federal side. And if there's gaps, we try to find ways to fill them, right? And so in this case, with AI training or communication or updates being out there, recommendations, I'd say, first of all, Texas DIR, I think they have a pretty sound guidance overall, whether it's cybersecurity or even if it's just offering resources, IT focus for organizations that could start for you. Other than that, some of the working groups we have, I recommend you maybe join one of those. So locally, we have the FBI InfraGuard. You can start there and see what other CI owners are also doing, or small business owners. If you get involved with those groups, I think you'd get some good tips, or at least a way to continue that conversation to use AI responsibly and also in a safe manner.
Anything?
I'll echo the DIR comment. There's really solid managed services agreements in place that really help folks out.
Okay, I believe that's all the time we have. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate your insight. Thank you.